Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Writers Guild Foundation Library. Thank you so much for hosting us tonight. You're here for a live taping of the Write On podcast from Final Draft. I'm Shani Edwards. Tonight we have two wonderful, amazing guests. We have Meg LaFauve and Dave Holstein. Maybe you can give them a little warm applause for them. Yes. You've probably heard of Inside Out 2, which received 2 Golden Globe nominations today. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And the film has grossed nearly $1.7 billion worldwide, breaking multiple box office records, including the highest grossing animated film of all time. That's really cool for Inside Out 2. That's amazing. I want to start with a little bit of background on you guys. Meg, you came to writing in a different path than most writers, and I think it's worth talking about. You had a very successful career as the president and producer for Jodie Foster's Egg Pictures.
Right.
And at one point you just said, hey, I'm going to give all that up and become a screenwriter?
Yeah, it wasn't quite that easy, but it kind of was. Isn't that the way life works, where you think about it and think about it? And then one day my husband said to me, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
You are now.
My husband basically said, shit or get off the pot. Like, you can't keep complaining about the job in terms of your ability to influence the creative. Just then, you want to be a writer. It's why you came here. You took a sidetrack. So go stand in the hot white light if that's what you want to do and be the writer. And so I did. I mean, first I thought, oh my God, he's so mean to me. And but of course it was a gift of that kick in the butt. So I did. And what's interesting is when you make those dramatic shifts in your career, because I went to school for writing. I came out here to be a writer. I just took a tangent over, which I'm very happy I did. I learned a lot from Jodie. She is my kind of mentor. I now approach writing from a director or actor point of view, because that's what I was steeped in, and the questions she would ask all the time. And it's also, I think, why I can work so well with directors, because I really understand, having worked with her for 10 years. I, of course, have an overdeveloped critic, because that development exec is still in my head. But it's a daring thing to do, to make that kind of a big shift. And you immediately go from fancy pants person with lots of chips in the game to no chips in the game and one more writer at the table trying to get in. It helps to have those contacts, but not for a while. You still have to go back and you have to write all the bad scripts. You don't get away from that. You can't jump that step of writing a lot of bad scripts that don't work. No matter how much you know or how many development situations you've been in, it's a different part of your brain, the dreamer and the writer. And so you still have to go back and take those years of work to write all of those drafts that don't work.
You mentioned learning to write coming from a directing and acting point of view. Do you think that's something that really helps you with writing character?
I mean, I think so, because when you're working with somebody of the caliber of Jodie Foster, her questions are really good questions about her character, or even any character in the story. So my brain was kind of trained on those deep, questions. If you wanted to pitch a script to her to act and produce or direct, the first thing she would say to me, what's the big, beautiful idea in here? What is it? What is this about emotionally? What is my character going through? Why this antagonist for my protagonist? So it really does kind of hone your brain down into those kinds of questions.
That's great. I also want to thank you so much for the Screenwriting Life podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
I'm a huge fan. If you guys haven't listened to her podcast with Laurie and McKenna, it's fantastic. It got me through the pandemic.
Oh, yes, all of us. Yes.
I used to take these long hikes and listen to your podcast. And there was one time, and you said something and I was working on a screenplay, and I just burst into tears and I had to kind of get off the route in the dirt and just cry for like 20 minutes.
Oh, no.
Because I realized whatever you had said, it made me realize that my protagonist's problem was my problem.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
And I knew that to finish that script, I had to solve my own goddamn problem.
Yes.
And that was it was really hard, but I did finish the script.
Because of course what we do, and Dave can speak to this because he's incredibly skilled at this too. Of course, what we do is a craft, right? You have to learn your craft. You have to learn the layers and layers and layers of craft to just be able to articulate. But ultimately, it's an art that we do. And that art form is that personal, vulnerable questions, pieces of yourselves that you're bringing to, and then using the craft to uncover. So you do want to push, I think, into that stuff that does make you have to step off the path for a moment because it's so profoundly looking at yourself and your own blind spots. You know, if you have a character if you have a really hard time getting a female character to want something and drive towards a want, you end up having to look at yourself, right? And why are you not driving towards your wants? What is dangerous about wanting? Those kinds of deeper things start to pool up. And I think that's why it's an art, because you have to be the brave one to go into that breach.
Dave.
Yeah.
I would love to know a little about your background. I know you've written for some really amazing TV shows like Kidding, I'm Dying Up Here, and Weeds, one of my favorite shows. I was so sad when that went off. Tell me how you started writing.
I started writing as a 13-year-old with very little else to do. I think my bar mitzvah theme was must-see TV. I was always writing, in my spare time as a kid, and then I went to school to be a playwright, and started doing that after college, and was writing books to musicals at Chicago Shakespeare, and trying to fill 99-seat theaters. Not with $1.7 billion, but with enough to buy beer at the end of the night. And then I came out to LA to be a production assistant on Weeds. I was a PA. I was a PA on some shows before that, but then I landed on Weeds as a PA, and then I started. Then Jenji Cohen, who created Weeds, who's my Jodie Foster, and she's never been called that in her life, and she really appreciate that.
Is.
Yeah, and she, her assistant was pregnant one summer, and then I became her assistant for the summer to fill in, and I had a play running in New York at the time, and she saw the play and offered me the writer's assistant job in the room on Weeds season 3. And I was writing, and so I got a freelance episode out of that. And nice. That show went 8 years. So it kind of became my grad school in a lot of ways. It was a TV show that was at the time kind of novel to be both a drama and a comedy. Mm-hmm. It was really, Jenji is so great about just breaking rules and pushing boundaries. And the room was staffed with a lot of playwrights, a lot of people who were not subscribing to the rules of television. And so it was a really fun sandbox to kind of grow in as a writer. And that's where I began and then wrote on a bunch of television. And recently got into features.
Wow, I love that story, becoming the assistant and then moving up. That's fantastic. I wonder if you had ever thought about writing for animation, and how is it different than writing for television or writing for the stage? I
actually find there's a lot of parallel between writing musical theater and writing animation. They both take about 5 years for every project you want to do. But when I first interviewed at Pixar, which was about 10 years ago at this point, for Toy Story 4, the thing that came to my mind was, in musical theater writing, as a book writer, your job is to take these songs, but give them emotional context, right? And make sure each song really sings, really emotes at the level that that it can, and provide ballast for that. And I found in animation, you don't have songs, but you have these sequences, these animated sequences. And to be able to provide the right emotional context, the right storytelling context, so those resonate the best that they can, it's not a dissimilar job.
Wow, I didn't put that together. I love that connection. No, it makes complete sense. I'm wondering, how did you come together to be this duo writing together? Because Meg, of course, you did Inside Out 1,
Yes.
which was hugely successful, and you were nominated for an Oscar. Congratulations on that. How did you know that you were coming back for the second one?
No, and I didn't even know there was going to be a second one until there was. In animation, especially at Pixar, the directors internally pitch the ideas. And Kelsey Mann pitched an idea that Pete Docter thought was sequel worthy in terms of anxiety taking over Riley's mind at a certain age. And then they called me and asked me if I wanted to come and work with Kelsey. So I came in at that point. That's what we know. Anxiety is going to take over the mind. What is happening? What is the story? Coming up with new emotions, all of that started there. Coming up with new emotions was not easy. It had to be pitched to Pete. It had to be proven. Where have they been? How that to follow all the world rules now have to. That's another amazing thing about animation is there's a tremendous, especially a sequel. People think sequels are easier, and I'm like, no, it's much harder. It is much harder to write a
They
sequel.
have never written sequels, those people.
Because you need to do everything as well as the first and yet better and go to new places, follow all the world rules, but create new ones. I mean, it's just so many balls in the air. So I worked with Kelsey through, actually we went into COVID during that. Mm-hmm. So I was writing during COVID. So we had a lot of access to anxiety in our research because it was everywhere. And then eventually, these movies do take 5 years to make. I had another commitment to write something with my husband. So after about, I don't know, was it 2 years, 2.5 years? I can't even remember now. I went off to do that. And then Dave came on.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like, Dave, to work at Pixar? How is it different than doing television?
There's nothing like writing at Pixar. It's its own thing. I mean, I like to say that they're this tribe up in the Bay Area that invented fire on their own. Like they just completely have a different way of building their product. And as a writer, you're thrown into such a washing machine, of like you're writing, you're shooting, you're editing, you're drawing all at the same time, and constantly just trying to keep and you're iterating. You're writing scenes 9-10 times, trying to perfect it. But yeah, it's like nothing else. In TV, you can write something on a Tuesday and shoot it on a Thursday, which is good sometimes to actually feel like you have to finish something. But at Pixar, it's about having time to finish the movie many times and to go back and better it and to tighten it and is this the right story? Is this story worthy of the efforts put into it? It's a very different process.
Meg, you mentioned this being sequel worthy. What does that mean? I know that Pixar has a lot of rules and guides for building worlds and all of that, but what is the criteria for being sequel worthy?
Well, it's funny because people ask me that question, what are the rules at Pixar? And I'm like, I've only ever heard one rule, which is this the best story? Are we there yet? Is this the very best story we could tell? That's the rule. Oh, the second rule is fail fast. They really want you pushing to things that are new and innovative, but so they expect you to fail. They actually want you to fail because you're pushing out to something and trying things. They want you to try things, try. But they want you to do that quickly, right? Because we only have 5 years. So it's always like hurry up, fail, go again. So there aren't rules. I mean, in any film, be it live action or animation, where you're world building, you're going to have rules of the world. Okay. And those, there were days that I was like, oh my God, who came up with this dumb rule? And I was like, oh, right, that was me in the first movie. So now you have to add into the complexity of this particular story is 3 levels. So you have Riley's world and the rules in that world. Then you have the rules of headquarters and what anxiety's doing. And then you have the rules of down in the mind with joy. Mm-hmm. So it's just incredibly complex. In terms of sequel worthy, it really is, that's up to Pete Docter as the head of Pixar. If he thinks that idea, my interpretation of that would be that it's rich enough territory, both in terms of the chance to go to see new worlds inside of Riley, because you want to see new things, of course, that we haven't seen before, whether that's like the sleeping area where the emotions sleep, something that was right on the other side of that wall, or a whole brand new world that we've never been to before, like the belief system. Or so does that idea have the potential to take us those places? But most importantly, what is this about emotionally? Just to go back to that question that Jody would ask me all the time. What is this about? What is going to happen to Joy as our main character? But it also is what is happening to Riley and what is happening to anxiety, and ultimately how do they all come together? And when you start with a spark of an idea, which is really a situation. Anxiety taking over Riley's mind is a situation. It's not yet a story.
Right.
And so you're really doing so much iteration. It's hard to describe how much iteration there is at Pixar.
I can be very specific.
Okay, you be
It was,
specific.
I think, 834 pages for me.
Yeah, it's thousands and thousands.
Yeah,
of pages.
it's a lot of iterating. And,
So we figured out that the first, you make the movie in storyboards, and the first version of the movie we made, there's 2 shots that are left in the final movie.
2.
2 shots.
Oh,
I don't mean
my.
story.
2 frames.
Yeah, 2 shots.
Yeah.
Because you're iterating and you're saying, you really have to be very brave and say, you know what, it's not working. Throw it out. Throw it out. So literally at Pixar taught me, when you're writing, and again, once you get towards that end of the second, the part of making these movies for 5 years, you can't do this because now the train is moving very, very fast and things are starting to lock in. But in that first 2 years of trying to find the story, you're never opening that draft that you wrote. You're never going back to it. So you get notes and then you have to re-outline. Because that's rewriting. Rewriting isn't going back into your draft and noodling around. That's just going to change symptoms of a disease. And you're not going to fix the disease. And you're just going to get all new symptoms. You really have to be very daring, and this is what Pixar does, and they are like, it's all up for grabs. What's the story now? Given those notes, now what's the story? Right? And so maybe the whole storyline of Joy going off with Gale, the fisherman, for ideas is not working. It's fun and it's good, but is it the best story we can tell? So instead of keeping rolling on that over, you just go, no, set it aside. What else? What if she went down in the mine with the emotions that we know and we like? Okay, what's that story? So you're just constantly iterating versions, right? To see what is the best story, what's really going to get us the most emotional juice, most fun. So it really has taught me that when you rewrite, you start over again an outline.
It really is. It's frustrating, but it's also very freeing, because I think you leave Pixar and you go back to other scripts and you get notes, and suddenly they don't seem as insurmountable because you, for me at least, I'm quicker to just rewrite a scene whole cloth or go back to the drawing board and try something else. And I think it's just healthy to redefine what's difficult. And I think that Pixar does a really good job of that, because there are no higher stakes than writing a $200 million movie that has to break $500 million to recoup. Like it's and that's always on your back when you're working on these things. Is it sequel worthy? Well, is it worthy of being a very high grossing film? Is it worthy of all these? Is it worthy of all?
Is it
these
worthy
things?
of asking this artist to draw your pages? And they're going to draw 250 drawings just for
hundreds of thousands of
just for
things,
that
yeah.
sequence.
Yeah.
So as a writer, you have a lot of pressure because you have to hold the whole story in your head. In this case, there's 3 different storylines moving and all arcing and all got a hit at the end. And you have to hold it in your head as these artists are coming in and they're playing, right? And that's part of it. Like as an actor, if it was live action, the actor would bring what they do and they would play, but you're there to make sure that the story is holding and they're not, that you have to really keep 3 levels of story in your head, and it's a sequel, and there's these giant crews moving through the process.
We're all brilliant and have so many smart ideas. And I think, where writers come into play at Pixar especially is just to make sure that all those ideas are telling the same story, and that there are you've too many good ideas, and it's about just keeping that North Star front and center.
So, how did you two collaborate? I assume that the director's very involved and the animators are all very involved, but would you huddle up and talk about ideas and then
No,
write them
I
down?
was gone on another project, so Dave came in.
I mean,
and did.
the two of us never overlapped, although we did 20 years ago work on the same TV show together. So we've known each other for a long time.
So we had
which was-
breakfast once.
We had breakfast once. No, but it was
Dave came on.
look, it was great for me because I could lean on Meg for emotional support throughout the process. But it was a rare and lovely thing. I think that we had this friendship that we could rely on. But the what was
The
question?
collaboration was really with the director,
because
with
you're always,
Kelsey Mann. Really, he's
Yeah.
as any movie, the director's
Kelsey,
leading the
John
charge.
Hoffman was the head of story. Marissa Hurwitz, the editor. I mean, you're just always in rooms with pockets of people from different parts of production, and they all have a say in story, and they all have great ideas. And it's a different kind of writer's room. It's a writer's room, but it's not writers per se. It's storytellers.
But it's all still left to us as the screenwriters to, like Dave said, take those ideas and now you got to test them out as a writer and as a storyteller, right? People kind of have millions of ideas,
Yeah.
but is that a story? Is that this story? Is that Joy's story? Is that Riley's story? Does that affect Anxiety's story? How is that going to change our end? It's a complex and yet beautiful job to try to keep that all moving and whole cloth. When I did Inside Out 1, I'll never forget, Pete Docter came back from a meeting in production design and they were building the world out and drawing. And he was like, John Lasseter, he moved long-term memory. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, he thinks it shouldn't be on the edge of the mind. It doesn't make sense. It should really be in the center of the mind. And I'm like, it's a road movie. Like, you can't just move where it is. What's happening there is happening at the end of her journey because she's gone all the way out to long-term memory.
Right.
And Pete was like, yeah, but it's a good idea. And I was like, oh my God, we have to rewrite. And you do. You do. Like, that idea won the day that was a better idea to have long-term memory in the center. Mm-hmm. So rewrite it.
I'm really glad for the sequel that occurred, just selfishly, because we get to long term first, I think,
Exactly.
in the journey. So that would have upended Act 2. But
Well, let's get into the story of Inside Out 2. It seems like puberty is kind of this inciting incident, right?
Yes.
There's this big button and it says puberty, I think, and this gets
Yes,
pushed.
it does. Or puberty, as they
Yeah.
misread it. Yes, puberty.
I was really impressed about how you navigated puberty for this, for Riley, who's now 13. And I'll be honest, it took me back to, seventh grade and all that anxiety that, we'll get to anxiety, but it really felt honest and authentic to me, all the things that she was dealing with. How did you kind of tiptoe through dealing with puberty without getting too messy?
A lot of research.
yeah. And also, I think just acknowledging that, there's low hanging fruit, right, with
Yeah.
puberty, and there's hormones and falling in love and all that. And I feel like we've seen those stories a bunch, and maybe there will be a sequel where that becomes a thing. I don't know, but I think for me, the puberty means change, and change can both have humor attached to it, but can also have a dramatic, reason to exist. And I think that to me was where I dug into. This is not Riley's story. She's going through puberty, but it's Joy's story. And so how does change give Joy a 3-act structure? How does change give Joy a journey that comes back? We know Riley's going to deal with puberty stuff. We've seen versions of that story, but how does that affect Joy specifically? And for me, it was I'm always asking, what is the most painful thing a character can experience? What is something that hurts? What would make her sad? What would make her upset? And this idea of her being replaced, was always sort of prevalent in this takeover story. And the more I sort of dug into, well, how does that make Joy feel? And how does that cause her to feel unworthy or unneeded or unnecessary? And if you keep digging at that, it makes you ask the question, what happens to joy as you get older? Because there is a truth to, like, forget just being 13, but, going from 5 to 13 to 20 to 27, like, you could make the argument that joy doesn't drive the console continuously throughout those years. And that felt like that's where, for me, the story was, which was joy having that experience of being replaced. And how does she ultimately learn that she's just a different kind of joy, and a joy that maybe is needed more. She just has to learn that lesson. And that, to me, felt like a maturing of the movie from 1 to 2. Mm-hmm. As Riley matures, I think it's helpful to try to mature the themes a little bit. And that always felt very resonant to me.
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of research at the beginning on anxiety, especially anxiety in girls and in preteens. We had Riley's crew, who are a bunch of teenagers who watched every screening and gave us feedback, and they were awesome. But, and ultimately, you're as much research as you do, you're always going to draw from yourself and your own anxiety. My own experience of being that age, we knew we needed to isolate her. A lot of teenage anxiety in today's world is on the phone. Yeah. But that's not going to make a good movie. So we needed something that she has to hand her phone over, right? So that is not, and that all that stuff that would normally happen online is happening live. You're overhearing things. You're being forced to do things. You're picking in that moment. So there's a lot of story construct around creating a space to put Riley through that, to put Joy through that. And in terms of anxiety and joy, it's a very vulnerable thing to feel joy. Anxiety doesn't like it. Because to truly be in your sense of joy means you're open and you're not worried, which is what happens to the brain. And as a teenager, is your sense of self and your sense of identity, you're becoming aware that other people are knowing who you are and making judgments about you. It's a real big brain shift that's happening, and that your sense of self can really go outside of yourself, right? What do they think about me? And that's why friends become so important in terms of just brain right now, and that the parents aren't, which is why the island is so small, the parent island, and the friendship island is so big. But for especially a teenager to feel joy and silly, that joy is a younger joy, she's silly, it does start to feel dangerous to anxiety. And anxiety isn't wrong. Mm-hmm. It is you do have to kind of understand, be self-aware. Self-awareness is coming, and it does bring anxiety with it. It's funny, sometimes people ask us, why are all the new emotions so negative? And I'm like, they're not negative. That's your judgment about them.
You are projecting.
Exactly. Every emotion in you, other than maybe shame, which she used to be in the movie and got taken out, they're all there to help you and and they all serve an incredibly important function. We were talking about want. Envy is really important, especially for females, because envy tells you what you want. And women are enculturated to know what everybody else wants. So maybe start listening to your envy. You don't have to act on it, but she's trying to tell you, she's trying to key you into where your purpose is and what you truly deeply want out of your life. So everything is, even anxiety. She started, honestly, in those early versions, she always was very helpful to Joy, but her motive was a little bit more nefarious, and she was working with shame, and she really was a antagonist. But it didn't feel true and authentic. And as a writer, you're always trying to pull back to that. Does this feel true? Does this feel honest? Is this authentic? Even if it makes the story not work suddenly and cards are falling down, but the authentic moment is this. And anxiety is trying to help you. Her plan to do it is really bad, though, often. It's just really not good. And you're trying to pull from your own adolescence, or honestly, from who I am now. I have an incredible anxiety she will hijack my imagination. I have an overactive imagination, and if I don't write and I don't put it out on the page and into my stories, anxiety loves it, because it's a lot more imagination that she can start throwing projections of everything that's going to go wrong in this room right now. right? She will just, so that's why it was kind of fun to be like, well, of course she hijinks imagination. And what do those projections look like? And how is she forming them? And how is she getting them? Like, that's all the fun part of it. Right. But adolescence is kind of that, a hyper, it's so big, isn't it? Right. And as you age, it starts to calm down, and you can get a little bit more, not control over it, but your self-awareness can kind of center back to yourself.
Well, you brought up the idea that you had shame, and that got cut from the script. Some of the others that made it into the final version were embarrassment, envy, as you mentioned, nostalgia is just there, just briefly.
Briefly, she's there for a moment.
And ennui.
Ennui,
And
yes.
that was, for me, that was a lot of comedic relief, because the French actress plays her, and she's just so could care less about anything.
Right.
Tell me about adding ennui to the story.
Well, I mean, she has to be in there. If you've been a teenager, or you're a parent of a teenager, which is when you really start to understand ennui and all the eye rolling that happens. Oh my God, there's so much eye rolling. She just had to be in there. There was a lot of question. We had a lot more emotions. You know, Schadenfreude, he was in the first movie and got cut. He tried to come back in his lederhosen in the second movie, but he just keeps getting cut. But ennui specifically, like, there was a lot of discussion of, can we call her ennui? And I'm like, well, that's the joke. Joy can't say it either. Like, that's got to be the joke. That Joy doesn't know what the hell this.
Wee wee.
What is this?
Yeah,
she just calls her wee wee. Okay, fine. Because it's too good of a name. It's just too good to call her ennui. It just feels like what that emotion is. She was super fun to write. There's always one emotion that I find hard to write. The first movie, it was disgust, because she can get one note so fast. And envy, for some reason, again, could get so one note.
I want this. I want this.
I want that.
This.
It just is like, it's like, oh my God, she's annoying now. And you never want that to happen. Whether you agree with her or not, you never want to be like, oh my God, I don't want to ever see that emotion again. Please don't have that emotion talk. And disgust and both envy could torque that very quickly. But we're lucky, because we're working with amazing comedians too, who can take those lines and really make them special.
I loved that ennui points out the sarcasm, which is an actual chasm that you can fall into.
Yes.
Tell me about writing the idea of sarcasm.
Sarcasm came as an idea from a storyboard artist. Do you remember?
Is it Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff Call.
Jeff Call, who's really, really funny, imaginative guy.
So funny.
And so what you do, especially in the beginning of these movies when you're trying to world build, is you will literally just start making lists of puns. Right? That could be...
There's a master list. There's a pun file.
Yeah, that you can just go through to start pulling from. Now, again, that's a situation, not a story. Right.
But it's a great situation.
But it's a great situation and very funny.
Thank you for bringing that up, because
meaning the writer, you can be given an idea, but you have to make it a story. You have to make it work. Why is it here? Why does Joy need it? And then we have to make it funny. We have to make it maybe come back into the movie later, as Dave did, in terms of that why did you need that in the movie, for the physicality of it. And I'll be honest, it was starting to get hard to write too, in terms of what could you say that was sarcastic?
What was great about that scene for me is there were 9 or 10 rewrites of that scene, but it always came back to the same scene.
I know.
Because there was only one great joke in that scene, and you could try to do it differently, but it was built for that one joke. Why are we suddenly having a salad? Like, it was just a very different, so yeah.
So I want to get into how deceptively simple the story is, but how
Oh, yes, do tell.
but how complex it is. And Meg and Dave, you've mentioned that it's actually 3 storylines.
3.5.
3.5. I counted 3, so maybe
but you have a whole separate storyline of sadness and
sadness gets
and
thrown
embarrassment.
Half. Yeah,
she has a little. She has her whole little thing that's trailing off on
if
the
you looked
side.
on the massive wall of note cards in the Pixar story room, there was yellow for joy, there was orange for anxiety, obviously, and blue for
and then Riley had her
her card, and it was, you could see where everyone's story, kind of concentrated. There's a bunch of blue here, so
It's almost like a symphony, right? They all have to be, they're all going to arc, they're all going to transition, and they all have to be hitting some of those character structure points at different times and yet be affecting each other. Like we had some really great sequences that just didn't make it. Procrastination Land, we went to where the facts and opinions were made, we went fishing with the idea fishermen, but they didn't affect that three-layer structure that everything has to affect anxiety and everything has to affect Riley.
But in the VR video game of this world,
Oh, yes, please.
save all of these worlds.
Yes, please.
Because those are all doors I want to walk into
know.
at some point.
Oh, me too,
Yeah.
for sure.
It's I mean, honestly, Dave will speak for himself. It's the hardest thing I've ever done,
Wow.
this script, because it's a sequel, so it has to be better. There's a tremendous amount of pressure. You have to find new, fresh, and yet the same, and yet give people what they want.
I
And
once stepped on a cactus barefoot, and I had to take out all the pins one by one. And you're right, this was harder than that. Yeah.
it's saying it because those three levels moving, and you need it to be emotional, and they need to arc, and it needs to be funny, and it needs to be fun, and it needs to be new, and it needs to be fresh, and it needs to feel familiar. And then sometimes the cacophony of all of those needs for the story gets so overwhelming that I would just be like, we're stopping now. Let's just focus on joy. That's all we're going to do. We're just not going to worry about Riley, and we're not going to worry about anxiety. Like, let's just focus on joy. Or today, we're just going to focus on Riley's story. Or today, let's just focus on the end. Because, my whole philosophy of writing is you don't know the beginning until you know the end. And we don't have an end that's working. So let's just take the next 2 weeks, whatever. And what is the end of this movie in terms of physically what's happening? We had headquarters fall down, and we had all kinds of stuff. But really, ultimately, what is Joy's story? And for me, as Dave said, it's Joy maturing into self-compassion. And that we always knew that at the first movie, Joy's asked to step back, and in this movie, she's asked to step forward. And even having that visual on the wall, like step back, Joy, and let other emotions drive. No, in this movie, Riley needs you step forward. Helps having polls for her character, but you're not there yet. That's, again, a situation, not a story. What is it, as Dave was saying, what is Joy's storyline that she has to come to realize? And that's how but see, because we know at the end, Joy has to be partially responsible. This is my big thing about it can't just be Joy's a victim of anxiety. That's not a story for her. That's not an arc for her. She has to have her own responsibility in what she did. In order for her to have a true transition and transformation, which is why that beginning of sending ideas to the back of the mind, Joy is already making a terrible mistake, right? She's doing a version of what anxiety is going to do. Anxiety is going to do it much bigger, but she also is deciding who Riley needs to be. So the complexity of all of that, you'd start to need to find just poles, I call them. All that cacophony of needs of storytelling, let's just find these poles of her character. Let's just work on the last pole. Let's just work on the front. And you have to know, part of being a writer in this kind of immense story,
Yeah.
is it's not going to work every draft. And you just have to somehow find a way to be okay with that it's going to be shown in a theater to 300 people who are going to give you notes, because that's how animation is. And you already know as a writer, oh no, it doesn't work. But that's okay, because this screening is about the end. It's about trying to line up these pieces of the story. And we know other pieces have fallen off. But that's part of that fire of being an artist is you have to be daring enough to risk that, to put it back out into the world, to get notes in order to help find that whole symphony moving. You aren't going to get that unless you're daring enough to try it and fail and put it out there and have the notes come back and go again.
I think what this movie is also a good example of, just from a screenwriting perspective, is I think we always start with what does the character want, and I think it was hard with Joy in this movie to figure that out. And sometimes that leads you to a good solve to have in your back pocket, which is that sometimes your character wants the wrong thing, and that the journey is about figuring out what they need and not what they want, or that they want something else halfway through. And
the key to that, though, is whatever your character wants in Act 1, you have to make the audience want it too. You, as the Godhead Zeus story person, know it's a want that's based on an ill-conceived idea, right? But the audience can't know that because then we're just waiting for her to figure it out. So like in the first movie, I had to convince you that sadness should not drive because that's what Joy believed. She's utterly 100% wrong. But I mean, there's a montage. Like we did that. If you
got
watch
me.
Act 1,
Yeah.
I'm brainwashing you to believe sadness should not drive. So that at the end of Act 2, when she realizes, oh my God, what I wanted, created this whole problem. And I have to wake up and do the opposite. And every movie doesn't work that way, but it's a kind of fun thing to think about.
We did the same thing in the sequel with the sending memories to the back of the mind
Right.
and hoping that you don't get ahead of the story that like, oh, she's going to have to learn that's a bad idea. But
Right.
but yeah.
And then that beautiful sense of self. I mean, I do want to make sure that we talk about the belief system. It's really fun to talk about anxiety. She's up and walking around, and so many of us, especially artists and writers, we're very, familiar with her.
She's very present, yes.
She's very present. I think because when you're an artist, you have and a writer, you have a connection to the creative energy of the universe, and you've been chosen in this sacred path to be a conduit for story. Wow, what an incredibly sacred thing. But it's energy constantly flowing into you. And if you don't do it, you don't write, well, anxiety is happy to come and use it for a while because it's flowing in, right? But the belief system to me is such a profound idea, and it's how I write too. I know my characters' beliefs in Act 1 and how they're going to shift and change through Act 2. Act 2 is basically saying, is that true? Do you believe that about yourself and the world? Is that true? Is that true? Yes, it's dangerous off the reef, and you're terrible at it, in Nemo. But there are sharks out here, but you handled it. And there's also beautiful turtles out here. So it's really something that I've always used, belief systems. And it's such a powerful idea that your sense of who you are and the way the world works is just something you've decided.
Well, I love how visual the movie takes these ideas and helped me understand them in a new way. Memories create beliefs, and those beliefs make up Riley's sense of self, right? And we get to literally see Joy, taking these balls of memories and putting them in different places for her to keep them. How did you come up with this visual representation of her sense of self? Because I don't know if I could figure that out.
I mean, Jason Deemer, the production designer, took years to come up with that. I mean, that when that finally landed, there was a huge round of applause at Pixar because that was a big ask, was to find something that represented Riley but didn't look like Riley.
Yeah.
You don't want to be too on the nose with it, but you also need to see it grow and have different, it has to sort of like have a plant-like quality to it. It's a big ask artistically to make that. And there were plenty of versions of it that were sort of stand-ins for it. But
at the very beginning, we were like, it's a statue of her. Like sometimes you just have to do the bad idea, people. Like we're all so worried about doing the bad idea that you don't do anything. Like there's a statue of her and it's cracking, all that bad stuff. And then it was just like, eventually it was just like kind of triangles, like prisms, like a prism. And in terms of the writing and animation, you just, you're lucky because you can say her sense of self glows.
Good God, yeah. I mean, if you're reading the script to this, you will see some very simple sentences because you really trust and want to hand the baton to someone without also influencing or limiting them. Frankly, I mean, you have lots of discussions, outside of the script to make sure everyone's on the same page. But yeah, the stage directions in a animated movie script are pretty terse because you there's so much happening between the lines, outside of your department.
I want to ask you about a couple of lines. When I think of these characters that are emotions, I just think of that emotion. And you guys really humanized them and made them, three-dimensional. And it really struck me when Joy says anxiety is right. Riley doesn't need us as much as she needs them, and it hurts. I don't know how to stop anxiety. Maybe we can't. Maybe this is what happens when you grow up, you feel less joy. And my heart broke in that moment. It's just so sad because then I thought, is she right?
Yeah. I mean, that I think I wrote that line in the back of a taxi. Racing to Pixar one day, or some version of it. But again, that was just for me, this working backwards from an ending of like, I think the most emotional journey for Joy is having this realization that may or not be true, that like I am not needed, and that as we get older, maybe we just feel less joy. And I think that resonates with everybody. But it also speaks to, I think, what's the way to write these movies is you're not writing for kids per se.
Right.
You're writing for an audience that will see this movie hopefully multiple times as they grow. And so, yes, you're writing jokes that my 7-year-old son will laugh at, but you're also writing lines that hopefully when he's a parent will resonate with him on a different level. And that's why I love some of these movies from my childhood, Disney films and Pixar films, is you do rewatch them a lot and you do notice new things. You see the movie differently. You see a different film entirely sometimes. And so I think what's so great about Pixar is that line can exist at the most climactic point of a film, because it says we trust that even though that line might resonate more with an older viewer than a younger viewer, that younger viewer will become the older viewer.
And Pixar has an incredible respect for younger viewers. Even in the first movie, there was some question of, will younger kids understand the embodiment of the emotions? And so they did a little test of, I think, Riley on the diving board and fear freaking out. And they brought some kids in from the employees, and the kids get it better than the adults.
Wow.
Because they're much closer to that pure state without all the layers that we've put on top, right? So this, I do think Inside Out 2 is a little bit older. It doesn't, but like, I love your description of the Looney Tunes comedy that's in there. I think that's such a great description.
Yeah, this world, I think, more than other Pixar films, allows for a Looney Tunes level of comedy and physical comedy that isn't really present. You can have dynamite just appear. I mean, you can do these fun things that I think the younger audiences can just watch a fun movie of antics and worry about the heady stuff, later. But and
for the writers, out there listening, it is just a layering process. That you will do a whole pass just on making yourself laugh and giggle, with each other, or you're going to do a whole pass just on joy, or a whole pass. And of course, they all have to speak to each other and come together. And I really think not only will people see different things as they age, I honestly think, like the belief system, I don't think the audience and the press or anybody has even begun to touch how profound of an idea is sitting in the middle of this movie. Which is also thanks to Dave. When I was on the film, it got cut because there was a real concern of, it's just too much new information, because I had it in the third act. And Andrew Stanton rightly said, it's way too much information to learn in the third act. Like, you can't introduce me to a whole new thing of how this works. And so they said, just take it out. And it was heartbreaking because Kelsey and I loved it, but we took it out. And he found it and figured out how to put it in.
Something I like about writers' rooms is the guy that enters 15 minutes late, and then walks in, looks on the board and goes, well, what's that piece of shit? And I think that it's sometimes helpful to have somebody who hasn't been a part of the conversation come in, and of course I did the opposite. I came in and I was like, what is this beautiful gem of a scene? Because it was sitting in a folder of deleted scenes, the belief system. And the first act at that point was already 39 minutes long. And I was like, well, good news and bad news. Like I'd really like to shoehorn this belief system idea into the beginning of the movie, because I feel like it could grow into a 3-act underpinning of the rest of the movie, because it just visually sort of levels up from the first film. Like, we had the memory marbles, that was such a signature of the first movie. But man, when I watched Joy pluck the belief strings and hear Riley's voice, I was so moved by that. I just thought, what a great additional visual component to sort of augment the first film, was to have this. And then it everything with me, I've always sort of the phrase that we always use in TV is use all parts of the chicken, and like, so that to me means that everything has to have three beats. Everything has to have every prop has to have three acts to it. And I just started to think, well, if the belief system is in act one, then, how can that relate to the third act and the ending? And then the sort of avalanche of memories sort of came out of that. And
just to speak to, I think it's a beautiful example of, as writers, often you're either going to have other commitments and have to leave, or they're just going to say, we feel like you've been on this a long time, we need a fresh voice, or there's many reasons that you move off a project as a writer, and mostly you move off projects. I mean, let's just get real. I mean, that's just the life of a writer. Mm-hmm. And it can be hard, and it was a bit of a mourning process for me. I did a whole episode on it on the podcast of crying over in a Sondheim musical as she sang Move On, because I knew I needed to move on. But if you really think about it, I just am so happy and grateful that the universe brought Dave Holstein to the movie, because it did take a new writer walking in and saying, guys, I know the first act's too long. We're going to make it longer. Guys, you're missing this beautiful thing. Because sometimes when you're the writer and you've been there 2.5 years, saying it over and over, or not knowing what language to get to make people understand it anymore, or I don't know, I just like it, is where I finally got to. Like, I don't know, I just like it. I don't know how to fix the math of this, right? Which is to put it in the first act and all the wonderful things that he did. And so I do think that you have to trust the story gods. You have to trust the muses. That if everybody has the best intention and is moving towards this, what is the best story, which is the beautiful part about Pixar. It's a beautiful little bubble of what is the best story. Then you need a Dave Holstein to come in and do his magic and his brilliance, and that's what the story needed in order to ripple into the universe. I mean, it's so beautiful that it made $1 billion. Of course, we love that.
2 billion.
Okay, 2 billion. But it's mostly exciting because how many people are watching the film and having conversations about it, right? Talking to their kids, talking about themselves. That's the most high thing you could ever hope for as a writer, that you've made this complex, immense story, and yet it can ripple and impact at that level. Is pretty astounding.
I so appreciate that, Meg. I think that, the other sort of non-Pixar version of that you can do at home, is to put your scripts on a shelf for a long time and then come back to them with fresh eyes and an easier sense of destruction. I think it's during the writer's strike, right? I came back to a script that I had put aside for a while, and it was a little freeing to just come in and be like, what the hell was I thinking? And like, you can start to be that voice to yourself.
Or I like this. Like,
yeah,
sometimes
sure.
you have to go look at your work and realize you actually like some of it.
Yeah,
right?
you are
We're
allowed
always
to
so
like your
close and
stuff,
ready to
yeah.
like hate it and stay. But what do you like? What do you like? Because, when you're at Pixar, it's so great because you see these creators who have made won multiple Academy Awards, and their first screenings also don't work. And they walk in, and the only difference between them and you is they go, okay, that didn't work, but here's one thing I liked. So let's talk about that. Let's start re-digging into what I'm trying to do as a creator, and I did like that, and okay, that didn't work, but they're just willing to stand in that fire of that doesn't work. Let's start over.
Yeah. They also have time and money, but other than that, like I think.
Well, what was a script? You can write a script. That's not.
Yeah, no,
I guess
know.
it's time, but
it's true.
There's no money.
It's true.
Well, going off what you said about how powerful this belief system idea is, and it really is. It's a heady idea, so you have to kind of translate that into your own life. But it is absolutely beautiful that you guys were able to, that Dave, you could rescue that and put it back into the story. So thank you for doing that.
I'm just looking forward to when Disney remakes it as a live action film in 20 years, how they pull that off, so stay tuned.
Well, at the end, Sadness has this great line, and she says, Joy, Riley wants you. And it's this beautiful moment because Joy has found a place. Maybe it wasn't the biggest place for her that she's ever wanted, but it was the place. And that was also a really emotional moment for me, getting to see that happen. There's integration and synthesis at the end of this film, where all of Riley has to be integrated, and that's one of the lessons Joy learns. In storytelling, does there always have to be integration and synthesis at the end? Is that kind of a key, or is that just this story or a coming of age story?
I think that falls into the category of there are no rules, right?
Okay.
Like as long as
It's satisfying.
It's
Does it work as
satisfying.
a story? I love stories that kind of leave a bit unsure. He's not going to stay with her, or because that's
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
Life doesn't wrap up with a bow. There's always a crack. There's always
questions.
but these are family movies. So you do want some sort of synthesis, I think, at the
we
end.
did get away with an ambiguous final frame. I will argue.
True.
Of is
Thank
she
you, Kelsey
smiling?
Mann.
Did she make the team? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the synthesis in this film is an interesting topic because you are trying to take three raging rivers and have them come together at the same delta, and that is what you're doing structurally here, is taking anxiety and joy and Riley and sadness and making sure everyone reaches their emotional climaxes is at the same time, which is a hard thing to figure out a lot of the time.
Well, for my last question for you guys, this has been such a beautiful discussion, and I'm just so happy to have been here and get to meet you guys and all of that. But what advice do you have for anyone who's writing these coming of age stories, or stories where people are trying to discover themselves and hopefully integrate different parts of themselves? And, Meg, you often talk about the lava on your podcast.
Yes.
Maybe you have some advice for getting into that lava in these types of stories.
It's funny because people use the term coming of age, and I'm not saying that's not a real thing, but isn't every story a coming of age story?
Basically.
No matter how old you are, aren't you coming to some sort of consciousness? I mean, I guess, not every character changes, so fair enough, but you are transforming the world somehow. So, I think if you're thinking I have a coming of age story, for me, I need to know a lot more than that.
Okay.
That's a start.
Yeah.
Right? That's a beginning. But who's coming of age, and how are they coming of age, and what is it that they're realizing about themselves, and what is it that the consciousness that's coming into them, how are they maturing? Like, again, I'm going back to what Jody would ask, what is this about emotionally? What singular thing is this about emotionally, which is your end of Act 2? So in terms of synthesis, I guess my advice would be don't worry about it, because it will drive you crazy. What you have to do is keep pushing to that authentic feeling of being honest, be that in fun or emotion, or, there's a lot different tones of that. But ultimately, your job is to tell the best story. And if it comes to, and to get through to that end, a lot of people get stuck in Act 1s. Act 1s are easy to write, people. You got to get through Act 2 and into the end.
Hallelujah.
If once your end comes, you'll know the beginning. And does it need to synthesize or not? I don't know. That's your character's journey. And that will be different for every story.
My advice is in sort of telling personal stories and coming of age stories is sometimes it's better to zoom in than to zoom out. And that sometimes for me, it helps to zoom in on a detail and let the detail be a microcosm for the rest of it. I know that when we were writing this film, I was thinking about my anxiety at that age and where that came from. And I had a speech impediment. I had a stutter. And so I hated Spanish class because I had to read out loud. And my stutter always came out in front of people, which made me very, very anxious. And it made that 30-minute Spanish class or 40-minute Spanish class feel like the stakes of it were the rest of my life. And I feel like for Riley, there was this essence of like, there's a 3-day hockey camp that could determine the rest of your life. And like, that's where I sort of sunk into. And if I was writing a different story about me, I would have, gone into those details, et cetera. But for me, it was about finding something very specific and very small. Sometimes I think stories can get too big or themes can get lofty, but like you can never write backwards from theme. You always have to write forwards from what the character wants. And the more specific that thing is, the easier I think it is to figure out what that story wants to be.
Great advice. Well, Dave and Meg, I can't thank you enough. Let's give them a little bit of applause for coming tonight. Best of luck this awards season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to all that.
Yeah, I know. Does anybody have any questions? I feel like we
I
should
know.
Oh, sure. If we want to take some
answer
questions.
Anybody? Nobody?
I took one. Oh, so you had. You have. Okay. Sorry. You mentioned quite a few times of frames that were thrown out or like a scene or a storyline that you had changed, and I just was wondering, was there a particular scene, storyline, or moment that was thrown out that you were particularly attached to?
Just so that the podcast listeners can hear it, was there a particular scene or storyline thrown out that you were particularly attached to?
I really loved shame. When you talk to the researchers, all your emotions are there for you. They all love you. They're trying to help you. Again, they might have a bad idea about it.
Except the Darth Vader of emotions.
Yes. Well, shame is different than guilt, right? Guilt is you did a bad thing. Shame is you are a bad person. And shame is really just another way to say self-loathing. And that really, there is nothing kind of healthy about it. It's about making you hate yourself in order to protect yourself. And I feel like women are taught that. And so it was, but she really, and I had a moment where Joy finds shame in the bottom of the mind at the end. And shame turns around and she's a shapeshifter. And so she shapeshifts into Riley. And Joy and Riley look at each other face to face. And Riley says, "You ruined me." Because as a mom, that would be the worst possible thing that could happen is my child looks at me and says, "You ruined me." In terms of my shame, right? And so, but I completely understand why we couldn't do it. She was really pulling a lot of attention away from anxiety. It really was kind of a darker storyline than the fun that Kelsey wanted to have, and I think he was right. But for me personally, and for me as a woman, it felt like a really rich territory to try to talk to women about how shame is weaponized in us to excavate our power away from us. But it wasn't for this one.
You and me both. I'll say in that deleted folder of scenes, I did come across shame, and I struggled a lot with why shame was not in the film early on, because in a Disney film, you don't ever really get to kill the antagonist, and so it's hard to structure that.
Right.
And shame was something you could want to not just be group hugged into Riley at the end. And there was so many emotional beats in shame that I will say in Inside Out 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
Maybe
100.
she'll show up
Maybe she'll come
later.
back because she was very
It's
potent.
in that folder,
She's
people.
very
It's in
potent.
the
Yeah.
folder.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question. What was your question?
So in regards to iterations, because I think you said only 2 things were left over. Outside of being questioned from other people in the room or the director, by showing the scenes, did you just challenge yourself? This is fine. I'm just gonna write another option. How do you continue to challenge yourself with?
There's a lot of notes that come in.
Notes.
A lot of after every screening, there's a brain trust meeting where a room full of people tells you what's working and not working in their opinion, and you go back and just iterate. You just try it again, and it comes from a lot of conversation, a lot of thought. But
Well, being brave enough to say, okay, I'm going to put this version aside.
Mm-hmm.
Like not even cut and paste this scene, which everybody loves, which clearly I'm going to keep because everybody loves it. So I'll just cut and paste it into my new document. Well, that doesn't work because what comes before it and after it changes that scene. And what your brain remembers about that scene is what you should write. Because it's an organically kind of, now again, when you get much, much later in drafts, even in animation, things are going to get solidified because it's moving into layout and stuff. But, when I first came on to Inside Out 1, John Lasseter said to me, "Nobody likes Joy." And I thought that is just the biggest note you could possibly get. I don't mean the character has to be likable. What he's saying is nobody cares about Joy. Nobody cares about what she thinks. Nobody cares about what she wants. That is just such a giant note. That's a blow up note. That's a start over note because something is terribly off down in the bottom of this if you're not attaching to your main character, even in curiosity. Even if they're an anti-hero, you have to attach the audience somehow to them, right? So it's really being brave about the notes you're getting and the note under the note and all those things. Like, what really is off in your engine of your story? And if you're really honest about that, it will all, like a deck of cards, just fall down. It has to, because the engine of Act One isn't working. And then going back to outline and being brave enough to, even just as a writing exercise, to say, okay, if the solution to joy is this, then what is that storyline? What does this become then?
I think maybe we have time for one more question. Anybody else?
No?
We have answered every question in the known universe, and that feels so satisfying to know.
All right, good.
Well, thanks for coming
Thank you,
out tonight.
guys.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Meg. Thank you, Dave.
Of course.